email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com, Instagram @radical_secular, Facebook, The Radical Secular, Twitter @RadicalSecular, and YouTube. Our podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Radical Secular. I'm Sean Prophet, your host. I'm here with my co-host, Christophe Difo. And this is our 10th episode. Yay, we're in the double digits now. We have a lot to talk about today. It is a very sobering time, and it was a sobering week in the history of our country. And so I guess we will jump right into it. Our main subject today is, of course, the disastrous events that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But of course, that happened against the backdrop of the Republican convention, which is, can you say fascism, anyone?
Fascism.
So, yeah. So what do you think, Christophe?
Oh my God, man. I mean, it has been just such an awful, awful week. And before I guess we get into all that, I mean, it has just been an astonishing week on so many levels, Sean, because, obviously there was the murder, right? Murders. There was the unrest. There was the murders from civilians. There was the folks, the militias crossing state lines to come and somehow defend property that they have absolutely no connection to, right? Astonishing, really. And then, of course, there's the death of the actor Chadwick Boseman. I always forget how to say that properly, but another sad sort of ending to a really important Black actor. And why is it important? Because and we talk about this a lot, Sean, you and I talk about this a lot, is that it's really the sort of the pop culture perspective on people of color and Black men in particular is always sort of thug, right? Or a drug dealer or dangerous and all these sort of things. And this has been played up over the last sort of, since the Civil Rights Act, really. I mean, but longer than that. And so these counter narratives are so important. Today I'm wearing my Star Trek T-shirt. I'm going to stand up from the mic for a second. I got a new mic, by the way, everybody. So we're like, we
looks and sounds great.
Sean and I always say that we're building this show, building this airplane as we fly it, and we really do sort of just add things like sort of step by step. My friend Ian, shout out to Ian Stoy. He's a friend of the pod and also a great friend of mine for most of my life. He gifted me this mic. Actually, we did a quid pro quo trade for some things that I won't discuss here because it doesn't matter. But anyway. So the shirt today is the symbol of the United Federation of Planets, and that is a Star Trek reference. As you know, we love Star Trek on this show. We are both huge Star Trek fans, and it's really, really important, I think, for a lot of ways. Not the least of which is that Benjamin Sisko, who is the captain of DS9 and the DS9 Star Trek Deep Space Nine franchise, he is a Black guy and a powerful, powerful actor, and also a civil rights guy on his own time. And there's lots of civil rights episodes in the show. But the reason why I'm bringing him up is because, again, a positive portrayal of Black fatherhood and Black men in general, and that is, and so that's why the Wakanda actor, Wakanda forever,
Wakanda forever,
thing, yeah, Wakanda forever. That's why it's so important. So anyway, so to answer your question, Sean, it has been a really harrowing week, I think, on all of those fronts.
Yeah. Well, I'll do my T-shirt real quick because it's very topical as well. This is the Say Their Names project. This right here has every name. Well, actually, no, not every, because you couldn't possibly have every name. But this has many of the names of the people who have been just absolutely slaughtered by our law enforcement in this country. And, I got to the point where I was trying to, really go back and memorize all these names, but you can't do it. It's just not possible to do it. And, so I'm going to say a few of them right now, which are George Floyd, of course, Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McCain, Ora Rosser, Stephon Clark, Botham Jean, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Michelle Cassot, and Freddie Gray. So those are just some of the names, and probably about maybe a tenth of the names that are on this shirt. And it's something that, I just don't, as as a white American, of course, I have to say that we all know that this is nothing new. There were, decades of lynchings and centuries of enslavement where, these people, our fellow Americans who were dragged here against their will, then, generation after generation were slaughtered and, oftentimes didn't even get a proper burial, unmarked graves, or not even a grave, maybe, burned or whatever. It's just shattering, really, to think about it and to think about that we're still having this conversation right now.
I couldn't have said it better myself, honestly, Sean. And we talked a little bit before the show about the lynching memorial and why that kind of thing is so important. Because, as we say, right, we have we have memorials in Washington D.C. I believe it's in Washington D.C. to the unknown soldier, right? So sort of a catch-all for those who couldn't be identified, who disappeared, and in defending America's interests over the last however many hundred years, right? So, and that's why the lynching memorial is so important for the people that we do know and we can name that or at least people's families can name their lynched ancestors, but it's important because there's so many names that we'll never know, right? And don't even get me started on actual slavery, right? I mean, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of names that are just gone for history. They're gone in history, right? Just as if and you know what? They didn't matter, Sean. That's the fucking point. That's why we're out in the streets, right? Black lives don't matter enough. They need to start mattering, right? That is why we keep saying this. I got in a conversation today with a friend of mine, Anthony, and he. I'm not sure if if he listens to the show. I know he was one of our early listeners, and I'm going to assume that he does because I think everybody should listen to our show. But he was, one of the early guys. He was, he posted something today or yesterday about a picture where the police officers were policing the Black Lives Matter protesters, but not these sort of Trump protesters, supporter, whatever they were, and he made a comment about that, about institutional racism, et cetera. And then some guy, and I won't mention his name, comes swooping in. I know him. He knows Anthony. And he comes in and has this dismissive comment about, oh well, the police are just dealing with the protesters because we don't know if they had a permit or not, and so the counter protester, and it's just look, these kind of deflections, these kind of attempts of oh wait, let's make a procedural argument oh yeah, well, the issue here is an issue of municipal law. All of a sudden, it's not a matter of civil rights that they're out there for, right? And it's these kind of deflections, and I don't have to tell you. I mean, this is a white man, right? I mean, obviously it is, and go ahead, Sean.
I want to say I think we're going to break the profanity meter today because once I am so fucking angry about all of this stuff that I can't even tell you. I just I want to crack some motherfucking skulls. I got to tell you right now when I hear these people, because I'm telling when you hear people who are going off about this, that, all these the deflections that you're talking about. I mean, it really comes down to white people in America just don't want to admit what's happening. They don't want to admit the history. They don't want to admit any of it. And every single time another African American is abused by our justice system or murdered, one of the two. I mean, it's just rubbing their noses. It's rubbing white America's nose in the double standard. And so they have two choices. They can either understand and accept the ethical violation that's going on and do something about it, or they can sit back there and fucking deny it and and just continue to perpetuate it, because there's no middle ground on this.
You're absolutely so right, and I think that is such an important thing to talk about here because it's all about it. You always say this, and I think it's true, and I think it's a really, really great point. And is that the fundamental, the central element of of racism, and structural racism in particular, is racism denial, right? And because it's really easy to look at and I say this all the time, and that is that look at a white supremacist and be like, oh, look at those racists over there, like, oh yeah, of course, right, you know, or literally, right, like de jure segregation, right, like law imposed segregation, say, oh, that was racist. Of course that was racist. But structural racism is really easy to ignore. It's really because it's not obvious. It's not obvious, right? And you can't just it's not, I'll put it this way. It is just now becoming apparent and obvious because of cameras. But for most of American history, it wasn't obvious, right? It's in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. It wasn't obvious because everyone wasn't walking around with a camera. And it makes it a lot easier for people, for white Americans to pretend like it's just not an issue. And because like you say, Sean, if you recognize that it's an issue, then you have a moral obligation to do something about it. And so the hoops, the knots that people twist themselves into trying to find a way that this is not racist, right? There's an amazing meme that comes around from time to time that says, and it just says, how is that racist? Question mark. Mm-hmm. And then it's like white proverb, right?
Yeah,
like, because that's always the thing.
I have an analogy, okay? And the analogy, this is, you know, it's trite, it's been overused, but this is an iceberg, okay? And the racism that people see, the only racism that Republicans acknowledge is the tip of the iceberg. If it's obvious, it's like cartoon racism. It's like, you know, yelling at someone the N-word, go back to your country, this stuff. That is cartoon racism, you know? And that's something that actually most Republicans don't even do that for the most part. You know, they're not, you know, and they are, let's be clear, racist to the core. That party is racist to the core. Every Republican, everyone who would ever even think about voting for a Republican is racist. And I'm going to say that right now. There is no room, there's no wiggle room whatsoever on that point. Every Republican is racist. And I don't care if they deflect to economic issues or other things like that. It is a racist party. It is a white nationalist party. It is a white identity movement from start to finish. And that is the only reason why there is even the slightest question over what happened, you know, in the Jacob Blake case. It's just like, otherwise, like if a white guy got shot in the back 7 times by a black police officer, okay, it would be the fucking end of America.
Absolutely. And you know, it was, and this brings up the kid Kyle, which is just like, of course, I mean, you know, I'm sorry if your name out there, if your name is Kyle, like it's a really tough time, Sean, to have the name Kyle or the name Karen. Like
Kyle and Karen
is really tough time to have those names. And look, you didn't sign up for this, right? No. You might be the most like liberal progressive guy in the whole fucking world, but hey, your name's Kyle, and now you're going to get looped in with the Monster Energy crowd. I don't know how to tell you this, but anyway, the point is that this guy's name, and you know, a little levity, perhaps gallows humor, as we like to, as we always like to say.
That's all you can do.
That's all you can do in the state of the world. So, you know, this guy's name's Scott, right? And you know, and like the defenses that you see coming for this guy, Tucker Carlson, coming out and defending this guy. Now imagine if this was a black. I was talking to my wife about this, and I always joke about my wife is always a test bed for like every argument I've ever made. I'm sure you and Jillian probably have a similar thing going, where like
we do.
I mean, she just hears me like you know, rant and rave sometimes, and then sometimes she'll just be like, well, have you thought about that? I'm like, you know what, that's a really, really great point. That doesn't actually make any fucking sense. Let me start over again. But I was talking to Lizzie about this, you know, and I was telling her, like, you know, can you imagine if I am a 39-year-old lawyer from New Jersey. I'm really well educated, right? I think I'm a reasonably smart guy, right? I don't look intimidating, right? Except for the color of my skin, potentially. If I were in that town that night, running down the street with an AR-15, running toward police officers with an AR-15, how fast do you think I would get shot, Sean?
You'd be on the shirt. You'd be on the shirt.
I would be on that fucking shirt fucking now. And this is a This is our, I don't have a pop filter on this thing, so I'm really hoping that my cursing doesn't come off like too intense. But even if it does, I don't give a fuck, because this is.
You'd have nothing on Rudy Giuliani, man. They just have to sanitize that mic to Kingdom Come after he was done, man.
He like practically vomits on it as he's talking. Like, right? It's like hitting the cameraman, right? The flecks of spit, you know. But yeah,
I'm surprised it didn't end up on the lens, frankly. You know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, the double standard is astonishing. And so when you have people coming out and still trying to defend this, and like, I gotta be honest with you, Sean, like this week, I always say that these sort of situations when another black person is killed for, killed for no reason, right? His only crime is not listening to a police officer, walking away from a police officer, as if that is is worthy of a death sentence, right? So every time this happens, the black community reels, right? And anyone who is a thinking, relatively well-informed, or even not, sort of black person of color, black person in particular, reels from this, and it is an emotional roller coaster every single week. And I wrote a whole piece about this. It's called Floydian Slip, and it's on Medium. Check that out. But it's this process of, first of all, holy shit, like, did this happen again? And then there's just this deflection of being like, well, of course it happened again. This is America. Let's move on with our lives. We have to. I mean, I can't literally just collapse every time this happens, right? But then there's this time where like the emotional dam sort of breaks, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, this really happened again, and still people aren't taking this seriously. Still people are lying about this. And then this week in particular, Sean, I'm watching the RNC, and that's why it was so insulting. And I could only watch the clips after the fact. I couldn't watch the whole thing through because like it's just this orgy of denial of white supremacy while speaking the exact language of white supremacy. You cannot make this shit up.
Well, this is the part that we're talking about, the dog foghorns, and part of those dog foghorns is the constant re-litigation every time this happens, and it's like to the point where I have this, the riot bingo, or the police apologist bingo, where you have all the stuff there, it's like, oh, they have such hard jobs, it's like, oh, he shouldn't have resisted, it goes on and on and on, should have complied, and it gets into this this authoritarianism where it's so funny because I have to tell a story about this. So I had a meme. I just ran across it actually, and it's these 6 different types of bootlickers, right?
I saw this. I loved it. Go.
I should probably put it up on the screen later, but one of them is like the family bootlicker. Oh, I have a cop, and he's my brother, and he's nice. He wouldn't hurt anybody. And it just goes on from there. The authoritarian who says that you should comply with the state's orders, and you wouldn't have any problem. And there's a religious one. There's so it all comes down to the apologists for hierarchy. The fact that there is a pecking order in society, in spite of what the Constitution says, in spite of what anybody says, there is a pecking order in society. And that pecking order cannot be violated. And if you're black, you will do exactly what the cop says, or you're going to get shot. And that's the unwritten law right now. That's become the unwritten law of the land at this point. And so every time this happens, we have to sort of go through and relitigate this because these sensible people are saying, but wait, the Constitution, but wait, equal protection, the 14th Amendment, all this stuff. And then, the racists come on there and, they make these bootlicking police apologist arguments. And then, you get the huge dog foghorns, which were, just blared out by everybody at the RNC about, mob violence and law and order and all these things like that. And those are motherfucking code words for racism. Okay, every time a politician says crime and Democrat cities, they are talking about people of color. It's just, that's it. There's no 2 ways about it. And I don't care. They can deny it all they want. It's a racist motherfucking party, and it's driving the U.S. White America is openly welcoming fascism into this country rather than live with equality.
You're absolutely right, Sean. And I remember, a couple of things, and I talked about this. I think I heard you say it, and I've heard you say it before, and I think it's right. And that is right. People would prefer to burn down the entire country, right? Take the Constitution and light a match under it. They'd prefer that. They'd prefer that than allow people of color and women and queer folks an equal seat at the table, right?
Absolutely.
Like they would rather live in a police state, right? In the police state, it's fundamentally un-American, right? It is fundamentally, at least as a matter of the Constitution,
Here's what,
right?
yeah.
Right. The Fourth Amendment explicitly reins in the state and policing, right? That is what it does. And so by throwing that out the window and saying that, oh no, and not even mention the equal protection clause, for fuck's sake, right? So by throwing these things out the window and saying, oh no, like you always say, Sean, right? Like some people are more equal than other people, right? Then we are saying like, fuck the United States. We don't care about the United States. What we really care about is power. What we really care about is hierarchy. What we really care about is the pecking order and making sure that I am dominant over the people below me in the pecking order and subservient to those ahead of and just like bootlicking to the people on the top above me, like astonishing bootlicking. Like I saw you in a conversation today or the other day, and the guy explicitly said, and I was just shocked to hear this. I think maybe you texted it to me, but like
I did, yeah.
Shocked to hear him say like, no, just shut up and just do what the state tells you to do, what your parents tell you to do. And it's just like, wow.
No, it was explicit. It was on full display. Okay, and what it was is like, I mean, these people, they will hold a copy of the Constitution in one hand and wave it in your face about religious freedom and all this other stuff like that, while holding another copy in the other hand and lighting it on fire. Okay, this is what these guys are doing, and it's so disgusting. And so this was, it's a funny story because I was actually on the thread. My poor lawyer. I have a lawyer who actually did, he won a case for me a couple of years ago, and he's a really good guy. And the problem is that he has some really conservative Jews on his feed because he's Jewish. He's a Jew from Iran, and so he has a lot of Jews.
Wow, that's an interesting juxtaposition there. Holy shit.
Yeah. So he has these other Jews on his feed who are, and this whole transition, I'm sure we've talked about this before, I think, about, Israel and the way that, the Jews went from a persecuted minority during the Holocaust to establishing their state and then basically turning into, or some of them turning into persecutors. And similar thing is happening to Israel has happened to us, where they elected Netanyahu, who's kind of a Trump clone, and who is all about cracking down on Palestinians, expanding territory, and establishing their two-tiered society over there, where that you have a whole second class of citizens who don't have any rights, and so. This is what's going on. So you've got these bootlicking Jews, basically saying, respect the state, respect your elders, and all these things. And it was so disrespectful because the whole conversation was started by my attorney saying how this black man had his rights violated. He's been paralyzed for life, And so this is an attorney who, like you, understands the legal implications of this thing. So then he has these people on his thread, and they're just running roughshod over the law, right? And so this guy wants to be civil. Well, I'm not civil on this thing. And so I told this person to go fuck both their parents. Okay?
I remember. It was so great.
And let me explain that insult. Okay, I think that is a perfect insult, and I have a good reason for using it, because number one, what it essentially says is that I'm going to say the most obscene thing to you in the world, and it's not as obscene as what you just said. It's not as obscene. Like, the idea of a person literally going and having an orgy with both their parents is less obscene than what happened to Jacob Blake this week.
Absolutely.
And
it is. It absolutely is. Absolutely is.
So, I just, and the fact is that when I use that insult, it freaks people out. It brings out the tone policers who really come in. It's like, oh, we all just got to love each other. If you keep talking that way, like there was another person who was on another thread, and they were talking about, cutting off family. And I said, yeah, you should cut off family. I said, if there's someone who is arguing for, this fascist police state and for having, a two-tiered society and second-class citizens and, losing, basically just flushing the Constitution down the toilet, yeah, you should cut that person off. So the person comes back to me and says, well, it's just going to be like the Civil War. We're going to be killing our family members. Do you want that? And I was like, no, I don't fucking want that. I don't want to kill my family members. I want my family members to come to their senses. And by shaming them and by letting them know that they are not welcome in my home or in polite society, if they're going to hold these views, that increases the chances that, people will kind of like just snap out of the stupor and come to their senses, and that we can have a reconciliation, because otherwise we're past that point. If shame doesn't, we're past the point of love. That didn't work, okay? And if shame doesn't work, then we're going to have a civil war.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was thinking about. First of all, yes, I absolutely agree. Right, we can't. The thing about the United States and about any country, any liberal democracy, such that it is a liberal democracy, is that you can't force people to change their minds, and you can't even do that in a fascist state effectively, right? Like people are people, and so you can't force them to change their mind through law or whatever. You can curtail people's behavior, and we should curtail people's behavior through law. Right? And we talk a lot about the state's monopoly on violence in that regard, right? And that's why the Minutemen, or whoever the fuck these idiots coming from Idaho or wherever the fuck they're coming from with their guns to be a militia, that's why that is so terrifying, right? Because there is a certain are we going to live in an America where there's just vigilante groups running around? I mean, is that how we deal with civil unrest? That's insane. That is dangerous. And we know why that's dangerous. But what I was thinking about is, in terms of civil war, one might wonder, right? Like, and I'm not saying that like we're on the verge of a civil war, but I mean, but if we were as divided as a country right now as we and it was 1860s again, would there have been a war already? There might have been, right? Because, right, I mean, and we're not so divided really on the numbers, right? Because there's a huge, most of us actually all really do agree on most of this stuff. There just happens to be a minority that has a distinct advantage, and at the electoral college level. The electoral
college is the whole thing. If not for the electoral college, Hillary Clinton would be president, cops would be being regulated, and none of this would happen.
Exactly. So what we're talking about here, and this is true across various apartheid states, right? And because that's essentially where we're moving, right? We're moving essentially to an apartheid state, which is apartheid state is essentially a cold war within a country. I just thought of that just now, but in some ways it is. It's a cold war inside of a country. It's a cold civil war, right? You have a group of it, and it's always a small white minority dominating everyone else. Other poor white people who feel on board because they are also white. And then whoever else the undesirables are. And so this is not new. But there's these structural hurdles, and we should talk about the convention and about what's.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But we are. So my point is that we're not as divided as we seem, but we are up against a power structure, and a power structure that is entrenched. And so if we start thinking like the peace and love approach, all we'll do is just get stabbed in the fucking back. As I always say, and I'm tired of saying it. Actually, I'm not tired of saying it because I love saying it. We're in a knife fight in a fucking phone booth. This is not but two wings of the same bird. All of that stuff has to go out the window, because that's just another way of saying, like, I'm just not going to deal with this. I'm going to put my head down and just live my life, because having to actually confront these systemic structural issues makes me uncomfortable. It's scary, and I don't want to, and I don't want to do it.
Well, I have a couple things to add to that, and that is, when I say civil war, okay, I don't mean we're not going to have, these battles. It's not going to be General Sherman and General Grant. It's not going to be, we're talking about, this is a hybrid warfare using a combination of the media, social media, propaganda, election interference, all of these things. This is how the Civil War is being fought. And so when that happens, you're going to have skirmishes, and the skirmishes could get big. There could be a couple of hundred people with guns shooting at each other. It's very possible, highly possible. Okay, because you get the situation here. I mean, this Kenosha event. I have this article talking about It was organized by the Kenosha militia, and this group is called the Kenosha Guard. The Kenosha Guard had organized this whole thing on Facebook, because they knew that there was going to be a Black Lives Matter protest. So it's like, what the fuck? Why do you need to be there? These are black people who are protesting, one of their own who has been paralyzed and for no good reason. Okay, so why the fuck is a militia coming out with their guns? What is the point of that? Are they, they say it's about property. Okay, we're protecting property. It's like, it's goddamn dishonest, and, they just want to get out there with their guns and cause trouble. And so they organized this on Facebook, and apparently this was reported to Facebook 455 times after it was created, but before the actual events happened. And moderators on Facebook refused to take the page down. And, afterwards, you got this fucking deer in the headlights, Mark Zuckerberg, okay? This guy, like a deer in the headlights, he's sitting there, and saying it was an operational mistake. It's like, well, that's after he's already collected the revenue, he's gotten the clicks, and, there you go. So this guy is just, he's a part of the problem.
He's a fucking psychopath. And I always say this, right? Because, I'm big on disclaimers. I am not a clinical psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I am just some dude who happens to think that Mark Zuckerberg is a fucking a psychopath. And why do I think that? Because, any person with that level of power, influence, and knowledge. He's a smart guy. Come on, he's obviously a smart guy. Right? First of all, you don't just walk into Harvard and then walk out of Harvard and then just create Facebook, right? I mean, right? And you don't build it into what it is unless you're a smart guy. But this is a guy who says, I don't care about electoral interference. I don't care about militias organizing on my platform. And then after the fact, to come out afterward and say, oh, you know what? We did make a mistake. But don't worry, we're not going to change any policies. But we will admit that we made a mistake, because that's what they always do, right? Like I've seen the guy, the leader of the ACLU. Oh, I'm sorry, the NCAA, the National Association, National Association of Colored People, right? It's like
NAACP.
NAACP. I couldn't remember the acronym for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's like, well, I was getting confused with the NCAA. Right?
Yeah. Right, exactly. And then also the ACLU. There's a lot of these acronyms. But so he has talked to Facebook, right? Like he says that I've seen him interviewed multiple times. He's a very, very smart, interesting guy, obviously. Articulate. He goes on. And he's being interviewed and being said, we go into conversations with Facebook and they just give us basically like a press release, right? In terms of dealing with these issues, these systemic issues that Facebook knowingly contributes to and facilitates, right? Literally in this case, facilitated the meeting of the minds that led to the militia going there, right? And then they just shrug their shoulders. And again,
they can't say they did. They can't say they didn't know, because they were warned. It was reported 455 times. Which, by the way, it says right here that it was something like 66% of all event reports that were made on that day was this page. So 2/3 of the reports that came in on that day to report, pages that were engaging in antisocial activity was this Kenosha Guard page. All right. And so, and it's like, look, you have to go back to who Mark Zuckerberg is, because people don't change, all right? And Mark Zuckerberg early on exhibited, and this is why I say all bad ideas are connected. All ideas are connected. And if you hold one set of ideas about hierarchy, then it's likely to carry all the way through your not just your social justice attitudes, but also to your economics and how you think society should be structured, whether you're religious, all these things. But in Mark Zuckerberg's case, everybody kind of knows this. It's a sort of a thing, but Facebook started out as a rating system for college women. And this is not talked about enough to understand how a fucking dude in college who created a rating system to evaluate women based on their looks. He found a way to download all these images of these women from the university. He didn't ask their permission, and he put them up on a site and allowed people to start rating these women. And so that is right there. It's already a dehumanization. It's already a nod to hierarchy. It is, and it's like, and people think, oh, it's a joke. It's a frat boy thing. Boys will be boys. But those are loopholes you can drive a truck through. And in this case, the truck is now a billionaire who is destroying democracy. So that's what it is.
You're absolutely right, and I think one of the things that we come back to all the time on this show is hierarchy, right? It's about hierarchy and why that ends up being so dangerous. It's very natural, right? I mean, we're human beings, and that is how our ancestors structured their societies, right? And that's how, in the ancestral environment where we developed as human and into human beings, that was a way things worked. But like many old ideas, they are bad ideas, right? And we don't need to live this way, right? This is a choice that we make. And frankly, most of us don't make that choice, right? This is what choices that are made for us day in, day out. You know, one thing that I was reminded of as you were speaking was in terms of, we cannot separate hierarchy, white supremacy, racism, misogyny, and patriarchy. You cannot separate those things. They are all the same. They're all the same shit, right? And so, you know, Kyle, the guy who's now been arrested, thankfully, finally arrested, for murder. You know, there is. I sent you this article today about there's a GoFundMe. It's actually not a GoFundMe because GoFundMe wouldn't do it on their platform.
Right. Well, yeah, the right wing has set up all sorts of alternatives, you know, because basically, you know, we have Patreon, they have Hatreon, you know, they literally don't make any bones about what they're doing. I mean, they are just like, you know, it's like, yeah, we're going to raise money for a murderer. That's cool. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Hatreon, you know, like we're literally going to, and like there was, you know, and you can't. So these, and the reason why you can't separate those things, right, is because they don't separate these things, right? Like they are defending this guy. They're saying how does this is a Christian organization, ostensibly Christian organization that is raising this money. What does this have to do with Christianity? Like, what does this, you and I know what this has to do with Christianity. You and I very much know what this has to do with Christianity, right? Yeah. But I'm asking the audience, think about that, right? Like, you have a Christian organization raising money to support a guy who he hasn't said he was Christian. We assume he is, but he certainly hasn't said it. He didn't run and start shooting, saying and being anti-Christian. And then you had these, and they, you know, first of all, they said there was Antifa there, which is just like the boogeyman of the fucking boogeyman. First of all, which of course they had to mention Antifa, but also
Antifa, it's get out of jail free card. That's all.
Absolutely, exactly. You can always throw Antifa into anything, and then Antifa, and I think another one in terms of race is like, well, what you know, black on black crime.
Same thing.
All these sort of stupid fucking deflections, right? But again, like, you really can't separate these like Christian nationalism, race, white Christian nationalism, racism. They're all in together in this toxic brew of just ignorance, an orgy of ignorance and fear. That's all it is.
It's power. And if I could take it back to first principles a little bit, you know, there's an interesting book called The Goodness Paradox. And the Goodness Paradox just discusses how we came to evolve morality as a species. And so what used to happen is there would be, you know, there'd be bad actors, there'd be guys who were, you know, strong or good with weapons or whatever, who would terrorize the tribe. And the weaker people would get together, the weaker males would get together, and they would overthrow this person or kill them. And that is how we essentially got to democracy and rule of law over the long term. That is the evolutionary sort of history where people said, no, might is not going to make right. We are not going to allow might to make right, okay? And so, and by the way, you know, 99%, even after that happened, even after we domesticated and civilized and found agriculture and built cities and all those things, still this impulse of might makes right was always there. And it was always a question of, you know, can the citizenry can the citizenry rein in the excesses of the king or the feudal lord? Is it possible? So there's just endless history of rebellions and, slave rebellions and all these kinds of things. But about 99% of recorded history has been in some sort of feudal state, not in democracy. So we are living actually in a very rare slice of time in human history that it may be slipping away from us. And we're seeing it right now. We're seeing it actually, moving into a situation of barbarism. And so, and it's no coincidence that, for example, Christianity has always tried to, and this is why we're here at the Radical Secular, because Christianity has always tried to run governments, has always tried to be the authority, and secularism is explicitly against that, and against the the unearned authority and the unearned hierarchy. As we say, I mean, we repeat this stuff till we're blue in the face, but I wanted to actually read something. This is by our guest from a few weeks ago, Joseph Okapinti, and he talked to us about COVID. But he wrote a very salient post about this on Facebook, and I think it's worth reading the whole thing because I think our listeners really could benefit from it. And this is here we go. What makes a society civilized? What makes one barbaric? It starts with the sanctity of life. What is the value of a human life? A black man gets shot in the back 7 times by police at a traffic stop. The police officers were in no actual danger. This shooting is justified by nearly half the country and celebrated by millions. This man is now paralyzed, and even so, he was shackled to the bed in his hospital. This is barbarism. A 17-year-old boy armed with an assault rifle crosses a state line and shoots a man protesting this police shooting. Others try to stop his rampage, and 2 others get shot and another killed. Again, near half the country believes this murderous boy was in the right, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Major figures justify what he did. A Christian crowdfunding website is raising money for the defense of someone who was killed in cold blood. This is barbarism. How is any of this possible? How has America descended this far from civilized behavior? I'm sure there are many reasons, but one thing is clear. Since Trump has been president, America has become more dangerous, more destructive, and a less civilized nation. International surveys show that Trump is considered the most dangerous leader in the world. This administration has broken ties with traditional allies, with peaceful democracies, while creating new ties with leaders who murder their own people on a regular basis. This is barbarism. I do not think most Americans want this, including most on the right, but a set of beliefs that have grown keeps people from seeing this tragic decline of our civil society. It keeps them from witnessing this very dangerous and destructive fall in our ethics and morals. This post isn't going to convince any of the people who are taking the side of the 17-year-old murderer, or those taking the side of the police, no matter what they do, including shooting unarmed civilians in the back. These believers are truly convinced America is threatened by people of color and liberals. Killing becomes justified, necessary, and even celebrated. This is barbarism. When regular people get to this point, when their vision is so blinded they can justify murder, something has shifted. We have entered a time when civilization withers and great suffering returns to the human condition.
Wow. I read that earlier today, but I think hearing it out loud, I think is particularly sobering, Sean, because I think back to the 1990s, and we were talking about DS9, and I remember watching it on my little TV in my bedroom, and I remember, and I bring up the 1990s because I as reflected in some of the shows and vibe from that time, it seemed like, right, it was the end of the Cold War, right? United States was ascendant and dominant, right? Even more than it was before. And it seemed like, right, and I remember growing up, and I say this, I'll talk about this a lot because it's such an important part of my experience, but growing up in an environment where I was the only black kid, but I didn't, like we talked about earlier, I didn't hear a lot of overt racism, but I certainly didn't think of militias in the street. Like, I didn't think of anything that we are seeing now. The closest thing would have been the Rodney King beating, right? And I was really young then, and all that kind of stuff. But and the subsequent unrest. But what I'm getting at is that, like, I at that time, in my naive youngish state, I just couldn't have foreseen what Joe just described, and he described it so well, because that is what's happening. We're talking about, and you also mentioned something that's really important. I think this is frequently overlooked, and that is, right, we are living in a unbelievably rarefied environment. The idea of democracy, the idea of one person, one vote, the idea of no despotism, the idea of peaceful transfer of power, like, this is stuff that is so new, ladies and gentlemen. This is so new and so rare and so delicate. And meanwhile, we're throwing it around. It's like throwing a glass around a cement room. Like, it's, you can't keep doing this. You might luck out, but eventually it's going to break. And that's what that feeling invoked. It buttresses my resolve, I think, right, to fight. We must.
Well, and this is something really to say to white liberals, okay? I want to point out that the 3 people who Kyle Rittenhouse shot, okay, they were not black people. He was not taking revenge on Black Lives Matter protesters who were black. He was taking revenge on white social justice activists. And all 3 people were, in one form or another, they were professionals. They were they were people who were contributing to society, and they were very, very concerned, as you and I are, Christophe, about social justice. And so they were out there marching. They weren't just talking on TV like we are. They were out there marching, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Joseph D. Rosenbaum, 36, he was shot in the head, died instantly. Anthony Huber, 26, he tried to wrestle the gun away from Kyle Rittenhouse, and he was shot in the chest, staggered away, took 4 steps, dead. And then another guy who actually had a gun and who was about to take on the gunman, Gage Grosskreutz, 26, he was shot in the arm, and of course, it was an assault rifle, it was a military weapon, and those things leave a cavity about the size of an orange in your body, and his entire bicep was blown off. So this is a guy who will now be maimed for life. He will keep his arm, but he'll basically lose the use of his arm. He'll have to go through years of physical therapy, possibly get a prosthetic or whatever. This guy's life has changed forever because he was out there heroically trying to, stop this, because who knew? I mean, at that point, you see a 17-year-old kid with an AR-15 style rifle walking down the street, and as a patriotic American, you have to stop that person. You have to stop them. And so, this he did. But he got shot, and luckily he didn't lose his life.
Yeah, and the 2 things that pop into my head right away is that, first of all, right, like an AR-15 or that style of rifle fires of what's called a 5.56 round, and that is a military grade round. And as listeners can't see it, but what I'm describing is I'm showing a bit about the size of the round. Size of the round's about that, and as it right, and the jacket falls off. And then the bullet continues, right? And the bullet's now about this big. But as it hits the human body, it tumbles, right? It tumbles. And it's designed that way, by the way. It's designed that way because a 30-06 round, which is a much bigger round, old school round, will go right through you, right? And that's actually way better because you're much likely to survive that, right? Unless it hits you in a vital organ. But this is actually specifically designed to tumble when it hits you. And so the in wound might be like the size of a quarter, right? But the out wound is the size of an orange or a grapefruit, right? And so this is the kind of guns that we have fly like that, just around right in Walmarts, in Starbucks, right? And a 17-year-old child has one. And Sean, you and I were both 17-year-old men. And what kind of decisions did you make as a 17-year-old man?
No kind of decision that would have
no kind of decisions I wanted. No good decisions, Sean. No good decisions.
Let's just say that the NRA, one of the things that they did, and of course, this is why I tie the Republican Party and also Christians and their organizations, their entire network of organizations, to white supremacy, because the NRA is one of the premier white supremacist organizations in the country, even more so than fucking Stormfront or even like Richard Spencer at this point is kind of like he's kind of banal. He's endorsed Joe Biden and stuff like that. Like the real white supremacists are not these cartoon characters. They are these structural organizations. And so you got the NRA, and they spent all this time going from state to state to state getting open carry put in place. And what open carry does is it basically, previously, if somebody was walking down the street with a rifle, that person would be immediately arrested. Exactly. Immediately arrested. So now the cops have to look the other way. They look the other way, and by the time somebody's shooting, it's too late. And so they've essentially got a situation, the NRA has brought about a situation where every white person is going to be allowed to walk around with these military weapons on American streets and bring the war home, basically. And it might be open carry for black people as well, but as well as I do, they're going to get shot.
Just like that. There is no, I think, greater double standard and such obvious description of the double standard than Philando Castile. Castile, right? This is a guy who is, first of all, obviously, in the first instance, and not that this actually matters, but nevertheless, he was a perfectly clean guy, right? He had no record, no nothing. He works in a fucking school, for Christ's sake. You don't just walk into a school and start working there. That's an extensive background check. You don't just walk into a school and be the cook there, right? So this is his job. Now he's in his car and he gets shot to death because he tells the officer, "Yes, I have a gun, and yes, I have a gun. Yes, it's registered. Yes, I'm tied." Yeah, and
he has a permit.
Yeah, literally had the permit to drive, to own and carry the gun, and he goes and says, "I'm going to," whatever he said he was going to do, maybe get his driver, and then he just gets shot to death with his kid, I believe, in the car as well.
Girlfriend and kid
in the car. Now, there's another example, and there's this meme that flies around, where this one of these 3%er types with his hand on his gun, his concealed gun, or not concealed, I'm sorry, his gun on his hip, right? I'm on my hip now, right? And there's a cop approaching him. No gun raised. It's in a crowd of people. No gun raised, and and he is telling the cop with his hand out like this, saying like, "Oh, don't come near me. Come near," with his hand on his gun. And the cop doesn't even take his gun out, right? And it's just like, this is the double standard we're talking about here. And I want to say one point about the NRA, because the NRA now is in shambles, which is great fucking news after, just decades of incredibly destructive stuff, and the NRA didn't say a goddamn word about Philando Castile. Not one, not even pay lip service to it, Sean. Not even pay. It's just like you said, white supremacist organization. And you know why the organization's falling apart? And I'll loop this in real quick to those like sports fans out there. The Washington football team, formerly known as the Washington Racists by me, I call them the Washington Racists, right? Formerly known as the Washington Racists, the Washington football team is also a terrible organization that has been shown to be falling apart. And what is the theme here? The theme is these kind of people run really shitty, toxic organizations. Same thing with Fox News, right? But the sexual harassment is through the roof, right? These are toxic environments that no one wants to work in unless you are a megalomaniac white supremacist.
Well, it's like I said about Mark Zuckerberg, right? These ideas cluster together. So if you are, in favor of, if you're a white supremacist who wants to expand gun rights to protect white people from black people, you also are going to be misogynist. You're also going to be corrupt. You're also going to all these other things, because it is a failure of ethics. But I want to point out one more thing about the fucking NRA and other organizations like that, okay? They were really great organizations when they were in opposition. Now, white supremacy has made it all the way to the very top. So you've got Trump so these guys, you don't need the NRA anymore. You don't need these racist organizations, because they have now become the establishment. The establishment has completely taken over, and they are, they are systematically destroying the equality under the law. Bill Barr and the appointment of these judges, all these, Christian Reconstructionist judges, and even at the Supreme Court level. I mean, they will not uphold justice. And the longer Trump is in power, the more justices judges he gets to nominate. He's done 300 right now. There's 1,800 federal judges, and by the time, if he gets a second term, half of them are going to be Trump judges.
Yep. That's absolutely right. And by the way, this trickles all the way down, right? I read an amazing article from 538 this week, and the whole gist of it was that, and I'll maybe we can put it in the show notes because I think it's a really really great article. But the whole gist of it was is that the party that the Republican Party and has become increasingly more extreme, but it has almost no choice. It feeds on itself, right? So you have Trumpist people showing up, and the particle as the party becomes more Trumpian. Which, by the way, this all started with Fox News, right? And basically radical, like basically the language of grievance that Fox News sells, right? That is their product, right? Outrage, grievance, etc. And so they became an establishment part of the Republican Party. The Republican Party couldn't help but couldn't keep their fingers out of the cocaine, right? Like, just like, oh man, that's so good. And they just kept coming back. They knew they couldn't keep riding this tiger forever, but they said, fuck it. I'm going to keep going back. And look, they won a lot of elections on it. But now the party has become the party of Trump. And now to survive in the Republican Party, you have to become a Trumpian. That's how it happens. And so what you're seeing now is that on the state and local level, and this is my point, and the state and local level, right, you have overwhelmingly chairs of Republican parties, county chairs, state chairs, they're Trumpian. And so what they do is they have people, we talked about QAnon last week, right? Mm-hmm. Like the people that are winning elections, that are being put up as primary challenges, they're not moderates. They're not moderates. They are QAnon people, Sean. They're QAnon people. There is a QAnon person on the ballot, I think in Georgia or somewhere right now, who has a real chance to win. Chance to win.
No question about it. And this is the process of apartheid or fascism or whatever you want to call it. Because once you start with having majority rule, which we never had in the beginning. I mean, we always had an electoral college, so there's already a built-in advantage. You had to win by 5 or 10% in order to win the presidency. So that's already baked in. And then you add to that gerrymandering. And the gerrymandering, also, where the politicians pick their voters and instead of the other way around, so they can tailor make a district to isolate, black people in one little area and dilute their vote with a lot of white people. So like white supremacy has operated through gerrymandering, and then they took it another step further, which was voter suppression and voter ID laws. Okay, so now they're protected even more. And every time you take another step like this, you get more and more extremist candidates because you need fewer and fewer people to elect them so they can drift farther and farther from the mainstream. So the way you get Trump in is you have an extremely narrow electoral college victory where he actually lost the popular vote. So he does not represent the people. These senators don't represent most of the people because they come from low population states. I mean, it's just on and on and on how much the deck is stacked in this country. And it may again, and then you add the media. You add. I hate using the phrase "the media," but when
I know we talk about this a lot. Yeah. Because you don't want to make it to one of their boogeymen, right? Because it's one of the right's boogeymen, the media.
Yeah, it's not really a boogeyman. I mean, Fox News, fact. Between Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and a number of others who Glenn Beck, and it goes on, Lou Dobbs, the Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson. These guys have essentially radicalized. They've radicalized America. I mean, they've done it over a period of 30, 40 years to the point where, people who used to be sensible, people who used to be, union members of the middle class have suddenly, they've gone whole hog into this politics of grievance, which, as you said, it's like crack cocaine, and I mean, they just can't, at this point, they can't put it back in the bottle, and nor do they want to. They're getting everything they want. The Christians are getting everything they want. They're getting school choice, which means federal dollars for their schools. They're getting all these conscience clauses and exemptions. They're getting tax cuts. Corporations love it. So it's like they have weaponized this grievance to ram through the destruction of the Constitution, and it's not being done by they're not going to repeal the First Amendment when it comes to the media, but more and more and more what's happening is they're suing. There's libel suits. There's claims of classified privilege for information. So we had all this stuff was settled. From starting in the 1970s with the Pentagon Papers going all the way forward. The idea of against prior restraint, the idea of protections against libel lawsuits, and all that. This was all settled law. And now you have Trump is reopening that entire can of worms. And I'm telling you, if he gets elected again, the free press as we know it is done in this country.
I think that's right. And everybody should check out, by the way, Sean wrote a really great piece about the epistemology of this entire movement, right? And it's on the Medium, Just Words Fallacy Medium page. And you should definitely check that out. We'll put that perhaps in the show notes as well. Certainly a link to the blog. But you're absolutely right. And it's what's really... Another element of this, and what I thought about when you were talking, was how the unholy alliance between the sort of the capitalists and the Christian, right, and so right, because you can't. I want to talk about capitalism and capitalists more specifically here, because right, and I think Mark Zuckerberg is a really great example of this, right, which is that. And also perhaps a fundamental problem with the way the United States sees itself, which is this idea that what's good for business is what's good for America, right? So that means people's rights, all that kind of stuff, that doesn't matter. Aligning oneself with the most reprehensible elements of human society, which we see. Is perfectly fine if you make money off of it. So, and that's what Fox News did. I mean, that's what Roger Ailes did. Roger Ailes was a really shitty guy, no matter what. But ultimately, he was a capitalist, right? And so he said to himself, like, how can I convert my sense of grievance and anger and rage into money? And that's what Fox News did. And so I think you can't talk about this without talking about,
Let's be clear. Roger Ailes was a racist ideologue. I mean, if you watch the Loudest Voice, which I understand was reconstructed from actual conversations. It was a very factual show. He was on the phone with Karl Rove. He was on the phone, with the Bush campaign. I mean, he was completely involved. And he tried his damnedest to prevent Obama from being elected.
Right.
And he was also involved in electing Trump. So it's just. I mean, the racism, religion, capitalism complex is so tied up.
I love that. The racist, because it's like, right. It's like the military industrial complex, but insidious, but way more insidious, because it really is a complex, and you can't. And maybe that's like one of the themes of the show today, is that you cannot parse these things out. I mean, we can talk about it and we can split hairs, but ultimately, it is a system, right? It is, and we talk about systems a lot and the importance of systems and having good systems. This is a toxic system, right? And it's a system that operates, Sean, in plain sight. We talked about earlier, like not the caricatures of racists out there, right? No. Who cares about them?
All underground.
Exactly.
Under the tip of the iceberg. The tip is this, this thing everybody focuses on. It's like, if you don't say the N-word, you're not racist. But
exactly.
This whole other thing is there.
Yup, exactly right, and it makes it so easy to ignore, right? It's the frog. I think the frog in the hot water analogy. We made that analogy before, but obviously, as if you hadn't heard the other episode, that is, I'm pretty sure, bullshit. Like, if you put a frog in water and heat turn it up the heat, the frog's gonna jump the fuck out. I mean, come on, the frog wants to live like everybody. I want to live.
I don't know. If it's Americans, they're not. If it's an American frog, he's not going to jump out.
Yeah, that's a really great point. American frogs. American frogs.
We're torturing this metaphor, but that's okay.
Yeah, we're just like really beating the hell out of these fucking frogs. But the point is that, like, when it's right there in plain sight, it's so easy to ignore it, right? And that is why structural racism is so insidious, and patriarchy, right? Patriarchy, for fuck's sake, right? I mean, this patriarchy is one of those great examples of a system that's in place. Oh, and by the way, we can talk about that. What should we call her? I don't like saying B. I usually, maybe a cunt. I don't know. That's really bad. But I don't know. Anyway,
Well,
the woman that came on the
I would say, I would say another C word, which is collaborator. Okay,
Collaborator, that's even better.
the collaborator with the patriarchy, and there are many of them. I mean, we saw
Absolutely.
a parade of female collaborators with
Oh my God,
with
on
the
the RNC.
patriarchy, and we saw a parade of fucking black collaborators with this racism complex. You know?
Absolutely. Oh my God. Like, and honestly, I find it, as a person of color, I find it particularly like difficult to watch that. Like, I tweeted about this earlier, or the Radical Secular tweeted about this earlier this week, I believe. And that is this idea that, right, like these people of color, the tokenism that you see at the RNC, and this isn't new, by the way. Tokenism is obviously is a huge tactic on the right, because then you can just say, like, you point to that one black person that's in Congress, be like, what are you talking about? We're not racist. And that goes, by the way, to your iceberg analogy, right? Because you can point to it and be like, hey, look, we're not violating the iceberg, like, you know, like that kind of racism. We're not about that. We have black people in our administration, right? Well, and you know, you have and Trump says all the time, like, oh, I love Jewish people. I love having them count my money, and also my son-in-law is Jewish, and it's just like as if that absolves him, right? And also they had this black dude, like, a football player, right, come on and say, oh, I have known Trump for X, Y, and Z years, and therefore he's not racist, and we, you know,
This is the epitome of your bottomless pit of bad faith. I mean, what happened is that if you know, again, a lot of liberals didn't watch the convention. I didn't watch the first night because I was just disgusted and I didn't want to do it. But then I started seeing clips coming out of there the next day, and I was like, okay, I have to fucking watch this. And as a matter of fact, I'm complaining about it on my Facebook feed, like what these people are saying. And I have other liberals coming back to me. It's like, shut it off, dummy. It's like, no, fucking dummy. Do you want to wake up on November 4th and have Trump be president again? Are you like, is this where you're at? You can think if you close your eyes that people can't see you, you know?
Right. I think you're absolutely right. Like, and full disclosure, I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched bits and pieces, and I certainly watched certain speeches. And the one that really got was that one woman who came out. I can't remember her name, but she was, I think, one of the most despicable ones in terms of collaboration. And she was coming out and saying that, you know, she would support. She didn't say it in the speech, but she has said on Facebook, and she's a big, you know, sort of quasi celebrity or whatever. And she said that, like, you know, that she supports one house, one vote, with the man making the final decision, the man making the final decision about what that would be. And that's one. Yeah. And the second one is that she has 8 children, because of course she has 8 children. And she says that her one child that she adopted is a biracial black, and she said that she expects him to be she acknowledges that she expects him to be profiled, but she thinks that profiling is completely justified. And she also goes on to say, and this was, I think, not talked about often, because I actually watched the clip.
Well, you said she threw her own kid under the bus, which is exactly what she did.
Yeah, exactly right. She just basically she threw her own kid under the bus, and she goes on to say, like, right, oh, my kids always talk about race at home. And, like, I'm just trying to picture what that looks like with the rest of her white sons talking about race with the black son, as if that's like, oh no, she's like, don't worry, I'm not racist. We talk about race and their different skin colors, and he just looks like he has a really nice tan. That literally came out of her mouth. She said, he just looks like them, but just with a nice little tan. And again, as a person who grew up in a white environment,
erasure
and heard total that erasure. Kind of shit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've heard that kind of shit all the time. Oh, look, my skin is almost as dark as yours when we're out at the beach. Or, oh, your hair feels like a rug, as if that's something funny or interesting, or like there's some sort of commiseration that we're doing here. My point is, this kid's going to be fucked up. And you know what? He might be on one of those stages one day professing how their racism is not an issue anymore.
Well, yeah, and I just want to say, because, you know, oftentimes, like, you give these testimonials about your past on here, and oftentimes I don't say anything because I don't have anything to say. It's it's embarrassing, you know. It's embarrassing that people who look like me treated you that way, and it's just like I have like nothing to say, you know, and especially like when you. It's just hard for me to describe how much the Republican convention was gaslighting on the issue of race and gender. Because if you watch their roll-in pieces, okay, you'd think that they had passed the Civil Rights Act, you'd think that they had passed the Voting Rights Act, you'd think that they had done all these things that, you know, that actually had been done by Democrats. And you know, they all quote Martin Luther King, which, by the way, you in your meme, which was great, you know, you talked about, it's like, hey, Republicans didn't like Martin Luther King. They shot him in the face.
They literally shot him. They literally shot him. Don't, please. I mean, come on, right? And I always say this. I say this every MLK's birthday. I say it at the I dream of I dream of Genie. Oh God, Speaking about patriarchy, for fuck's sake, yeah. I dream of Genie. Anyway, so they at the I Have a Dream speech the day which just happened this past week. You know, and I always say this every time, like, this is your from time to time warning, that a reminder that if you were in the 1960s and if today in the 2020s you hate Black Lives Matter and what they stand for and Colin Kaepernick and all of that, you also would have hated Martin Luther King and the Freedom Riders and Rosa Parks and all of them, because it's the same thing. First of all, it's literally the same fight that we're having, and literally they're using the same language almost verbatim of the 1960s deniers. So you just and that's why it's so insulting to see these people come on the stage and try and claim the mantle of MLK. Go fuck yourself.
No, absolutely. And you know, the unkindest cut, I'm sorry, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was involved in the lunch counter sit-in, so one of the original ones, and he got beat up and he got thrown out of a restaurant, you know, and various things that happened. And he was a huge part of the civil rights movement, and he supported Trump in 2016, and he spoke at the convention this time. And that would be, it's like Rosa Parks. It's like if Rosa Parks was a Republican. I mean, can you even imagine?
I just can't. Like, how do you get there, right? I mean, like, how do you, right? I mean, it's a one wonder of the human mind, right? Because, right, you know, patriarchy, you know, like, right, white women elected Donald Trump in a lot of ways, right?
They did.
Because white women elected Donald Trump, right? Because the white women said, like, oh, I don't care about the misogyny, I don't care about the obvious patriarchy, I don't care about any of that. I like my position of privilege. You know, I like
submission. It's a psychological thing. They have made themselves comfortable in a submissive role with their husbands. They work that role, kind of topping from the bottom, you know, and they have this whole thing all worked out, and they see. Actually, this is very much brought out in that series from FX called Mrs. America, where you saw, you know, Phyllis Schlafly was the classic example of that. She was a very accomplished woman, and she was very politically savvy, obviously, but she was using her skill and her liberation as a woman, because she had the freedom to do all that. She was using that to disempower women in the future. And so it's a whole ecological niche, I'm telling you, that exists for Black collaborators and female collaborators, and even anti-immigrant Latinos and things like that.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. That is a big one. That's one that always makes me, like, Latinos for Trump is just jaw dropping, right? And it always, and you know, it always comes down to, and again, I'll draw on my personal experience here. Yeah, because growing up in a very conservative area, in my environment, like, I had every incentive to try and fit in, right? Because the only Black person, I mean, everyone wants to fit in as a young person, right? I mean, everyone wants to fit in as a person, but especially as a young person in high school or whatever. But also being the fact that I was a Black person, also being the case that I was coming from Montana after having been in a cult and just trying to fit into normal society, right? So, you know, I had every incentive to play down any difference that I had. And frankly, it's really, and I remember looking back on my young self, right, like, saying the sort of things that I hear from Black conservatives, right? Including my dad, who's a Black conservative, right? So, so you get this, it's really easy to buy into that and say, well, as long as I'm part of the club, right? Like, right, as long as they accept me and I'm part of the club, then I'm willing to play along because it's somehow a little bit less contentious. So I can't speak. I'm not a woman, and I'm not going to sit here and speak for women, but I suspect that there's something there, you know, which is this idea that, like, hey, you know, if I'm submissive, if I do what my husband tells me to do, and this is very prominent in like very fundamentalist environments, Christian and non-Christian alike, if I just do that, then I'm going to be protected. I'm gonna have everything I need, and like you said, I can top from the top from the bottom, right? I mean, I had, like, you know, women.
There's
tons of, you know.
yeah,
Go ahead.
there's a book called Fascinating Womanhood. And Fascinating Womanhood is, I forget the author now, but it was very popular in conservative circles. And essentially it argues that. It argues that women should figure out how to be happy serving their husbands. And it's a whole mindset they get into. And by the way, this is not separate from the white racism, right? Because I think they know that if they support equality, if they support women's liberation, that is also going to empower the civil rights movement generally. So they've got themselves into a position of bargain where it's like, well, we're happy here. And by the way, we like our suburbs the way they are. We don't want them putting low-income housing in our suburbs. And so it becomes a submission with a purpose.
Absolutely. I think I think that is absolutely right. And you know, it's so funny to hear this rationalization, and it comes back to hierarchy, man.
Always.
Right? It always comes back to the same fucking thing. It's about power and it's about hierarchy. So if I'm a man and I'm a Christian and I'm white and I sit on and I'm relatively well off, then I sit on top of a heap, right? I sit on top of the pile, and look, sure, there's some people that are richer than me, but that's the only people that are really above me on the hierarchy. Everyone else is below me, and that's great. And so, you know what? I'm going to come up with a really complicated way of and sort of persuasive argument why the hierarchy is good. Right. And that is what this sort of that is the rub of patriarchy. That is the rub of the collaborator, whether that be on race or whether that be on gender, or log cabin Republicans, right? I mean, there's another example, right? And there's always the group of collaborators that are willing. And every movie, right? Even in Deep Space Nine, right? There was a Bajoran. Who collaborates with the Cardassians, right, during the occupation. Like, they're always that group is always represented.
There's a gamble. You know, the gamble is: do I stick with the oppressed, or do I jump the line and try to get on the side of the oppressor? And you know, it's a question of, and that's why a lot of times they'll paint the oppressed as losers, you know, the victim blaming piece and the just world fallacy. It's like, well, you know, you can either complain or you can get on the side, of the successful, and you can do it. And this is the line that, like, Ben Carson was delivering. He's delivered it numerous times. You know, he's the collaborator of collaborators, you know, aside from being,
he is like the poster boy of collaborating. I mean, he is it. I mean, just, anyway, go ahead.
Well, and as well as being, you know, the anecdote with him is that he did brain surgery on himself.
I mean, that's great.
But it's like, you know, but he still manages to pump out these talking points of the damn, oh, don't get on the mental plantation where you want everything given to you.
The mental plantation one, Sean, that one drives me nuts because, again, it's co-opting the language of oppression and repurposing it for the language of oppression, slavery, of all these sort of awful things, right? And then repurposing them to literally recreate, to fight against justice, and that is so particularly sickening, that kind of language.
Well, the convention was aimed squarely at those suburban women that we're talking about and at black men. Black women are never going to vote for Trump. So although they tried, they pitched that whole thing. They had a black woman who was released from prison, and it's like, well, of course she's going to love him. Who wouldn't love him? If he just released her from a 20-year prison sentence, you know?
Right.
And she was unjustly convicted. I mean, it was drug possession or something, nonviolent offense, you know? And so she got her life back. But now, you know, So people make a devil's bargain. They sell their souls, to the Republicans for, to get on to jump the line and to be on the side of the dominant majority, whatever it is. And we have to talk about this. We have to talk about Trump's speech and about just the spectacle and Mike Pence's speech. I mean, they used they used the White House and they used two national parks, the Fort McHenry and the Washington Monument, and they use them as just shameless props to basically advance. And this is the kind of thing that is done in Russia in under fascist dictatorships, where the governing authority uses all the levers of its power to win re-election, if there even is an election.
That's absolutely right, and like the if is a big if, right? Because it's unreal, right? I mean, like the anti-democracy, the anti-democratic sort of element of the right is just it's just so shocking how openly they're willing to. I mean, think about the USPS sort of. It's right, like just like blatant corruption, blatant ham-fisted, just ham-fisted, just like and this all comes together with the flyovers and the and the tanks rolling through Washington and these kind of ideas, right? These kind of ideas are, like you say, like comically authoritarian, like this is a banana republic type. Type thing. That's giving too much credit, not enough credit to banana republics, I think.
I know. Well, it's like they're basically saying, I fucking dare you to do anything about it. Somebody stop me, right? Yep. And because everybody was saying, it was all over the news, the Hatch Act violations, you're not allowed to campaign from government property. So they had Trump at the White House, they had Mike Pompeo on a government-sponsored trip. He's supposed to be conducting diplomacy in the Middle East, and all of a sudden he's giving a campaign speech. It's just shameless, and they're just daring. And the Mark Meadows, the White House chief of staff, he's a member of the family. He's a terrible character to begin with. But he basically said, look, nobody outside the Beltway cares about the Hatch Act. It's like, really?
And what's so, yes, I know, and I heard that. And what's so astonishing about that, and it still astonishes me to hear it now, is that that's not the fucking point. The point is that there are laws, and we talk about this on this show all the time, the importance of the rule of law, that it applies to everyone, not just to the people below you on the hierarchy. It belongs to people above you on the hierarchy and you. And so the idea that oh wait, well, just because nobody, even if no one outside of the Beltway cares about the Hatch Act, false, by the way, because I'm outside of the I'm outside of the Beltway and I give a fuck about the Hatch Act. But even if that were true, that is just so not the point. Basically, just what you're saying is well, if you can get away with it, you should be able to do it.
Right.
Right. I mean, that is essentially what you're saying. And by the way, that is bread and butter fascism or authoritarianism. That is bread and butter Trumpism. This idea and bread and butter hierarchy. This idea that the rules don't only apply to the people below me, right? And to the extent that I can get away with something, I will get away with it. And again, rejection of the idea of citizenship, of democracy, of commitment to these principles, which as we talked about earlier, there's no the only part of the Constitution that matters is the Second Amendment. And the First Amendment, and only parts of the First Amendment. That's it.
And no Republican would have ever signed on to this stuff before. I mean, the idea of calling the Democrats the enemies of the state, enemies of the people, the press, the enemies of the people. This is absolute dictator language. I mean, there's just no coming back from it now.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And and all of this to say, everybody out there, ladies and gentlemen, and if maybe you don't want to be called lady or a gentleman. Maybe you are non-binary, and that's fine too. I don't want to get wrapped up into that, but nevertheless, we gotta vote, man. And that's obvious. We have to vote. Everybody knows that, right? And we talk about that here, but it's more than that. We have to really, and this is why Sean and I think, do this, is because we really want everyone to understand the stakes and also understand the tactics, right? We are in a war, and it's not a bullet war. although there are bullets, as we see, people are dying.
Yep.
People are literally dying. People are literally dying. It's like, right, we are, right? It is I like to call it a cold civil war, but here we are. And the point is, like, we cannot pretend that the GOP or the right, people like Bill Barr, people like Mike Pence, right, or the Christian right, we cannot lie to ourselves and say that that they are going to be willing to have a fair fight. They're not interested in having a fair fight at all. In fact, at all. They understand power. That's one thing they understand very, very well, Sean. They understand power, and they understand that, if it's a zero sum for them. And for them, and you talk about this a lot, I think, Sean, is that, for people like Mike Pence, I sometimes wonder, how did Mike Pence get up there? I mean, Donald Trump's a fucking sociopath. So, like, you see him up there, get up there and lie, fine. But Mike Pence is not. Maybe he is. But Mike Pence is ostensibly a normal guy. But he really believes that he is in a struggle for, like, humanity, right? Like a Christian end of day struggle. So for him,
that's the point.
For him, it doesn't matter, right? Anything is justified then. Under those circumstances, any lie, any death, any stealing an election is all justified because there is a Christian God behind you. That God is with us.
He's eyeballs deep into the family and that whole power structure. Okay, the racist capitalist Christianity complex he is ass deep in that all the way up and down the line. He openly talks about praying in the White House and doing all these things. They are openly trying to inject religion into schools. This is not even. It's just. And here's the thing. Like, okay, I still think we have a shot at winning in November, and I think it's as far as I'm concerned, the whole future depends on us winning. But say we don't, okay? Say Trump wins again, all right? We're going to see some things happen in the next 4 years that we never imagined that we would see in our lifetime. And so now you've got us facing 2025, okay? Who's going to be inaugurated in 2025? And are the women and people of color and immigrants and liberals in America going to allow the elections to be turned into a farce where, in 2025, say Ivanka gets sworn in as president of the United States? Like this could get so much worse if we don't put a stop to this right now. If we don't draw our line in the sand and say, we are not giving up our America, we are not going to, and that means, like, I sometimes wonder if the Democrats are taking this seriously enough.
I hear you, dude. I mean, and I know that you talk about this online all the time, and I worry about that. I really worry about that. I've heard enough people, plenty of people say, "Oh, he's on the ropes." Trump's on the rope. And that is just a fundamental misunderstanding of how elections work and how power works.
He's got 1 million people knocking on doors. They're going to knock on 1 million doors in swing states, okay? I don't think we have any sort of plan. And I was talking to somebody and they're like, oh, we can't do that because of COVID. It's like, fuck that. You know?
Absolutely.
We need to be out there knocking on doors.
Absolutely. I mean, and look, and since when does anybody care about fucking COVID-19 all of a sudden? Like,
Not
everyone,
anymore.
like, you know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden everyone's like, oh yeah, well, God forbid people go knock on doors, but don't worry, I'm going to go to the beach and go to restaurants. It's perfectly fine. Yeah. I'm wearing a mask. It's okay. Yeah. No. Look, COVID-19 is no excuse here, right? And the people that are in the streets protesting, and keeping the heat on this administration in that way, and keeping the heat on the police forces in that way, are doing a critical job. And guess what? They're out there with masks on, and and they're taking their lives in their hands in that sense, right? Like, they're literally taking their life, and so they are willing to do that for democracy. They're willing to do that for their cause, and we have to be willing to. I'm not saying we should go expose ourselves to COVID-19. Please,
no, but you wear your mask. You just wear your mask and you stand back from the door. You talk to people. It's like
you can stand, I'm looking outside. You can stand at the bottom of the stairs. You don't have to come all the way up to the door, right? You can knock on the door and then walk down to the bottom of the stairs and just sit there and have a conversation, right?
The point is, we need to be doing outreach, and we need to be acting as if our lives depend on this election. Because, as I said before, I don't want to put I don't want it to be alarmist here, but our ability to even do this, people's ability to speak their mind on social media or to produce, TV or media or whatever, is going to be severely curtailed. It's just, and it's not. I'm not that worried. Like, I don't. We're making this show, you and I, Christophe, because we care, not because we want the publicity. We're making the show because we care, and I want to be able to keep doing that, but I want to not need to do that. I want America to figure this shit out. And so, but part of that includes, we got to start taking these elections more seriously, because I do believe that the next election, they may have one. Even if Trump wins, they may hold another election, in 2024. But it's not going to be a real election. Already, this election is being questioned from so many sides. I mean, you got the Postal Service, you got voter ID laws, you got voting machines that can be potentially hacked, you've got people defecting from the Democratic Party. You've got people who just don't want to vote at all, or they want to vote, third party. You've got, then you've got the Electoral College, and then you've got, Fox News. There's so many factors that are working against us. Just the heavy hand of power, just to stamp down, what might be our last opportunity. And so, I don't want to drag this out. I know we've been talking for. It's been, I think, like an hour and a half, but it's probably our longest episode yet. But I think it could be our most important episode yet, because this week really defined the battle. And we really saw, after we were all on this big sugar high after the DNC, thinking how great it was that we had this decent man and this, and Kamala Harris, and, and we love them. We love them, but they brought out the big guns for the RNC, and the polls have moved.
Mm-hmm. And they'll continue to tighten, man. They're going to continue to tighten. This is not in the bag. And yeah, this has been a long episode. I think it's been a good one. I think an important one, and on a harrowing week, frankly. And my message to everyone out there is that we cannot give up. We cannot slow down. We have to keep our feet moving, if in any way that you are able to do that, right? And, for the two of us do this show, and hopefully one day we work ourselves out of a job on this show, right? That's the goal, right? Because the goal is to make America better, and help it live up to its roots, to its potential. But we all have to do our part in the way that we can do that. And look, if you have any questions, reach out to Sean and I. You online, anything. Questions about what you can do, how you can contribute in any way. I don't have all the answers, but I'm definitely happy to help everybody work through to those answers.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for watching, and we will see you out there, and see you next week.